The sun bleaches the sky over Córdoba, a white-hot disk that beats down on a fractured land. From the heights of the Alcázar, the view should be one of splendor, the silver ribbon of the Guadalquivir, the sprawling city, the green patchwork of the valley. But the air tastes of dust and dread. This is Al-Andalus, the once glorious emirate, now a body in the grip of fever. It is the year 912, and the Umayyad throne is a seat of splintered wood and cold stone. Our gaze descends, not to the throne room, but to the private quarters. Here, a boy of 21 stands at a balcony, his hands gripping the rail. This is Abd Al-Rahman. He is not yet a hero. He is a survivor watching his inheritance unravel. The heat is a physical weight, pressing on his shoulders, but the chill in his veins is deeper. He listens. Beyond the palace walls, Córdoba murmurs, a cacophony of market cries, distant arguments, the call to prayer. But underneath it all, a more sinister rhythm pulses, the whisper of conspiracy, the metallic rasp of a blade being sharpened in a shadowed courtyard. His grandfather, Emir Abdullah, is dying. A ruler who mastered the palace, but lost the province. The map of Al-Andalus is not painted in unified colors. It is a madman's sketch. Independent rebel lords, the mulades, hold fortress cities like Seville and Zaragoza, mocking Córdoba's authority. In the north, the Christian kingdoms of Leon and Navarre scent weakness, their scouts probing the frontier mountain passes. And within the palace itself, the true poison festers. Family. His own uncles and cousins, their smiles as sharp as daggers, had murdered his father. Abd al-Rahman was a child then. He remembers the stifled screams, the way the marble corridors seemed to drink the sound. He remembers the taste of salt tears or the sweat of the servant who hid him. He turns from the balcony, the ghost of that memory clinging to him like a shroud. The room is cool, dark, fragrant with sandalwood. But his inner world is a desert, scoured by a wind of betrayal. He runs a finger along the hilt of a ceremonial dagger on a table. The metal is smooth, cold. This is the sensory truth of his life, the cold steel of potential murder, the hot breath of suspicion. He is the last viable heir, a single thread holding a frayed tapestry together. To his enemies, he is just a boy, bookish, perhaps too gentle. They do not see the calculations behind his quiet eyes, the geography of survival he studies every waking hour. Outside, the kingdom convulses. We see it through his imagined fears, made vivid. In the rugged hills of the Serrania de Ronda, the rebel Umar ibn Hafsun rallies his men. The sound is not of glorious battle, but of a hammer on anvil forging crude swords, repairing chainmail. Ibn Hafsun, a former bandit turned warlord, dreams of a kingdom of his own, and his defiance is a contagion spreading from town to town. To the east, in Toledo, another clan plots in deep stone chambers. Their loyalty is a currency, traded to the highest bidder. And then, the sound that cuts through all others, the slow, mournful chant from the emir's chambers. Emir Abdallah is gone. The news ripples through the Alcázar like a shockwave. Silence first, profound and heavy. Then a rustle, the swift footsteps of courtiers, the hurried closing of doors, the low, urgent conferences behind lattice screens. The coil of the serpent, the nest of vipers his grandfather ruled through fear and division, tightens. They are all waiting. Which cousin will make the first move? Which trusted guard has been paid with promises of gold? In his room, Abd Al-Rahman does not weep. He closes his eyes. He breathes in the scent of the dying oil lamps. This is the moment. The shadow of the past, his father's murder, his grandfather's bitter lessons, merges with the terrifying present. He is no longer just a grandson, a son. He is the emir. The title settles on him, not as a crown, but as a yoke. He walks to a basin of water, immerses his hands. The shock of the cool liquid is a sudden, clarifying pain. When he looks up, his reflection in the polished bronze mirror is different. The boy's uncertainty has been burned away, leaving a grim resolve. The internal monologue, the endless loop of fear and memory, falls silent. In its place is a single, clear directive, as hard and real as the stones of his fortress: unify or perish. The chapter of the victim is closed. The saga of the ruler begins at the edge of a knife, in a palace humming with treason, under a sun that shows no mercy. The path ahead is written in blood and sand, and he must now pick up the pen. The air in the Alcázar of Córdoba hung heavy, not just with the scent of jasmine from the inner gardens, but with a palpable tension that seeped from every stone of the ancient palace. Outside, Al-Andalus was a fractured mosaic of rebellion and defiance. Inside, an aging emir, Abdallah, wrestled with a legacy teetering on the brink of collapse. His sons, hardened by years of petty power struggles, had failed him. His grandsons, born into a dynasty that was once the envy of the world, now saw only its decay. Yet in the quiet resolve of one boy, barely 20, Abdallah had seen a flicker of the old fire, a desperate hope for a future he would not live to see. It was in the hushed, cavernous chamber, where the midday sun struggled to pierce the intricate lattice windows, that the impossible choice was made manifest. Abd al-Rahman, still reeling from the execution of his own father, Muhammad, by his grandfather's decree, a shadow that would forever mark his soul, stood before the assembled court. His uncles, men whose claims to the throne were far more direct, bristled with barely concealed fury. Their eyes, sharp as daggers, cut through the young man, dissecting his every move, searching for weakness. Abdallah, his voice a rasp, thinned by age and the burden of a dying emirate, formally declared his successor. "Let it be known," he proclaimed, the words echoing with a fragile authority, "that from this day the mantle of the Umayyad emirate shall fall upon the shoulders of Abd al-Rahman, son of Muhammad, son of Abdallah." A collective gasp, then a rustle of expensive silks. The air crackled. The heavy gold embroidery on the courtiers' robes, seemed to gleam mockingly in the dim light. For Abd al-Rahman, the world narrowed to the sound of his grandfather's fading voice and the suffocating weight of expectation. He felt the gaze of every man in the room, the loyalists, the schemers, the envious. He could almost hear the whispered accusations. Too young. Untested. A boy inheriting a kingdom of ash. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He was not merely accepting a title, he was inheriting a war. The very stones beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with the unrest that ravaged Al-Andalus, a symphony of distant skirmishes and the mournful cries of a disintegrating realm. He remembered the conversations with his grandfather, long, arduous nights spent poring over maps, tracing the jagged lines of rebellion. The north, a hornet's nest of Christian kingdoms, ever encroaching. The south, a hotbed of Berber tribalism and the relentless assaults of the Fatimids. And within the heart of Al-Andalus itself, the most venomous threat, Umar ibn Hafsun, the mountain bandit, who had forged an empire of defiance from his impregnable fortress of Bobastro, his shadow stretching across the entire southern peninsula. Seville, Merida, Toledo, once loyal jewels in the Umayyad crown, now mocked Córdoba's authority, held by defiant local potentates. The constant, gnawing threat of conflict had been the lullaby of his youth. The desert heat, not just of the physical landscape, but of the burning ambition and resentment that fueled these rebellions, had always been present. As the formal proclamations concluded and the murmurs of the court began to swell, Abd al-Rahman felt the rough silk of his new robes against his skin. They felt less like garments of power and more like a shroud, heavy with the ghosts of past glories and the stench of impending doom. He pictured the territories marked in red on his grandfather's, mapped cities and towns that no longer paid tribute, fortresses that flew rebel banners. He saw the faces of the men who surrounded him now, some bowing with feigned deference, others barely concealing their contempt. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. The weight of the crown, though not yet physically placed upon his head, pressed down on him, a crushing burden for one so young. He had spent his childhood in the relative quiet of the palace, steeped in poetry, astronomy, and the art of governance, yes, but protected from the raw brutality of the outer world. Now that world crashed in upon him. His father's fate, a stark reminder of the ruthlessness required to survive in this viper's nest, echoed in his mind. Strength, not mercy, his grandfather had often whispered, is the currency of kings. He looked out from a high window later that day, across the rooftops of Córdoba, toward the distant, hazy mountains where Bobastro lay, a defiant scar on the horizon. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. It was a beautiful, tormented land. He was Abd al-Rahman, the storm-born, named for the merciful, yet tasked with bringing an unforgiving peace. He was the chosen one, not by divine right in a land where such claims were contested, but by the desperate gamble of an old man and by the sheer, terrifying necessity of survival. A shiver, not of fear, but of cold, hard resolve, ran through him. He had been anointed, not with oil, but with the dust of a crumbling empire and the blood of his own family. The whispers of doubt still clung to him, but beneath them a different voice began to emerge, quiet but firm. If Al-Andalus is to fall, it will not fall on my watch. If it is to be rebuilt, I will be the one to lay the first stone. The storm had arrived, and the Stormborn was ready to meet it. The year is 912. A heavy, suffocating silence hangs over the Alcázar of Córdoba, thick as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of amber sunlight. Outside these walls, the great mosque stands as a monument to a glory that is rapidly fading, its forest of arches echoing with the prayers of a people who have lost their faith in the Umayyad line. But inside the palace, in the private chambers of the young Abd al-Rahman, the air smells of old parchment, bitter orange blossoms, and the cold, metallic scent of sharpened steel. He is 21 years old. To the world, he is a prince of the blood, the grandson of the dying Emir Abdallah. But to those who watch him from the shadows of the colonnades, he is a lamb born into a den of lions. He sits alone, his fingers tracing the jagged edges of a map spread across a cedar table. This is not a map of a kingdom, it is a map of a tragedy. Listen to the sound of the wind howling through the Sierra Morna. It doesn't bring the scent of rain, it brings the smell of smoke. The emirate of Córdoba, once the light of the West, has been carved into a dozen bleeding pieces. The authority of the throne barely reaches the city gates. Beyond the walls of Córdoba, the wolves are no longer circling. They have already breached the fold. To the south, nestled in the impenetrable crags of the Ronda Mountains, lies Bobastro. It is a fortress of stone and defiance, the lair of Umar ibn Hafsun. For 30 years, this rebel lord, a man of iron will and shifting allegiances, has been the thorn in the side of the Umayyads. He is the great wolf, a leader of the Muladi rebels who envisions a world where Córdoba is nothing but a memory. From his mountain perch, he watches the smoke of his raids drift toward the capital, a constant reminder that the emir is a prisoner in his own palace. Abd al-Rahman closes his eyes, but he cannot shut out the sensory assault of a realm in collapse. He hears the rhythmic, distant thud of horses, hooves messengers arriving with news of yet another city lost, another governor who has stopped sending taxes, another clan that has declared independence. The treasury is a hollow shell. The army is a fractured collection of mercenaries and disillusioned veterans. Every night, the young prince feels the weight of the crown before it has even touched his brow, and it feels like a collar of lead. He remembers the whispers in the corridors. He remembers the blood of his own father, Mohammed, spilled by the very grandfather who now lies dying in the next room. This is his inheritance, a throne built on fratricide and surrounded by fire. The wolves at the gates are not just the rebels in the mountains. They are the courtiers with smiling faces and daggers hidden in their silk sleeves. They are the Berber lords of the north and the Arab aristocrats who view this boy prince as a puppet they can dance on a string. The heat of the Andalusian summer is relentless. It seeps into the stone, making the very walls sweat. Abd al-Rahman rises and walks to the balcony, looking out over the Guadalquivir river. The water is low, revealing the muddy ribs of the riverbed, looking like the skeleton of a dying beast. He can hear the distant murmur of the marketplace, the voices of merchants who no longer dare to travel the roads because the bandits and the rebels own the hills. He feels the hunger of his people, their exhaustion, their quiet desperation for a leader who is more than a name. He strikes the stone railing with his palm. The sting of the impact is a grounding reality. He knows what they say about him. They say he is too young. They say he is too soft, with his fair skin and his love for books. They expect him to be the final emir, the one who will hand over the keys of Córdoba and watch the Umayyad dream turn to ash. But they do not see what he sees when he looks at that map. He doesn't see a lost cause. He sees a puzzle that must be solved with blood and brilliance. He feels the ghost of his ancestor, the great wanderer Abd Al-rahman standing behind him. That first Umayyad had arrived on these shores with nothing but a sword and a name, fleeing the slaughter of his entire family. He had built a paradise from the dust. The young prince realizes that the wolves are only bold because the lion is perceived to be dead. He turns back to the room, his gaze landing on a suit of chainmail resting on a wooden stand. It catches the dying light of the sun, glowing like embers. He walks toward it, his hand trembling slightly as he touches the cold links. The sensory contrast is sharp, the softness of his silk robes against the brutal, uncompromising reality of the iron. In this moment, the internal monologue of a boy ends, and the resolve of a caliph begins. He understands that to save the throne, he must first burn the old ways to the ground. He must become more dangerous than Ibn Hafsun. He must be more cunning than the treacherous viziers. He must turn the very heat that withers the land into a forge for his will. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long, predatory shadows across the floor of the Alcázar. The wolves are howling louder now, their voices carried on the night air from the dark hills of the horizon. They believe the gates are weak. They believe the boy is afraid. They are wrong. Abd al-Rahman III stands in the darkness of his chamber, the silence finally broken by the sound of his own steady breathing. He is no longer the prey. He is the master of the house, and he is beginning to realize that if you want to scatter the wolves, you do not hide behind the gates. You open them. And you hunt. The year is 912. Al-Andalus, once the jewel of the world, now fractured. Decades of internal strife and the relentless ambition of petty warlords had carved the land into a patchwork of defiance. From the sun-baked plains of Seville to the mountain strongholds of Bobastro, the writ of Córdoba barely extended beyond its city walls. The Umayyad emirate, a shadow of its former glory, teetered on the precipice of oblivion. But a new sun had risen in Córdoba. Abd al-Rahman, barely 22, had inherited not a throne, but a crucible of chaos. He had spent his early years observing, learning, honing an intellect as sharp as any blade. Now he would wield that blade. The whisper of his name, once a mere echo, would soon become a thunderclap across the peninsula. He would be the hammer that reforged Al-Andalus. His gaze fell first upon the south, a region rife with rebellion, its cities like Seville, Malaga, and Granada, long defiant. The most formidable of these was the formidable Ibn Hafsun, the ancient rebel, whose mountain fortress of Bobastro had become a symbol of enduring resistance against Umayyad rule for generations. But before Bobastro, Abd al-Rahman needed to secure the fertile Guadalquivir valley, to cut off the rebel heartland from vital resources. Seville, a proud city, had become a hotbed of dissent, ruled by the ambitious Banu Hajjaj. It would be his first target. The decision was made with a chilling clarity. The murmurs of his council, advocating caution, were met with an unwavering stare. Abd al-Rahman understood that to hesitate was to surrender. He would lead his army himself, a young commander at the head of seasoned warriors and raw recruits eager for glory. The campaign began with the relentless advance of the Umayyad legions. The sun, an unforgiving eye in the Andalusian sky, beat down upon the marching columns. Dust, thick and fine, rose in choking clouds with every hoofbeat, every step, coating men and horses in a uniform ochre. The rhythmic jingle of chainmail, the creak of leather, the low murmur of thousands of voices, became the soundtrack of their unwavering purpose. Abd al-Rahman rode among them, not aloof but present. He felt the same parched throat, the same searing heat that radiated from the earth. He saw the grim determination etched on the faces of his soldiers, men who had known little but division and defeat for too long. He had to give them victory. This is not merely about land, he thought, his gaze sweeping over the vast, shimmering landscape. It is about the very soul of Al-Andalus. It is about proving that order can return, that unity is not a forgotten dream. The siege of Besieged, a key city on the approach to Seville, was swift and brutal. The walls, once thought impregnable, crumbled under the relentless assault of siege engines. The cries of battle, the clang of steel, the thud of bodies echoed across the plains. Abd al-Rahman was there, not in the thickest melee, but close enough to taste the dust and blood, to feel the tremor of the earth as rams battered the gates. He watched, his expression unreadable, as his men, emboldened by his presence, scaled ladders and breached the defenses. The city fell, a stark warning to those who would defy Córdoba. Next, Seville itself. The city, surrounded by its ancient walls, prepared for a prolonged resistance. Abd al-Rahman, however, had learned from his grandfather, Abdallah, the art of psychological warfare, of cutting off support, of presenting an irresistible force. He laid siege with an iron grip, encircling the city, starving it of supplies, but also sending forth envoys with an offer: submission or annihilation. Days turned into weeks. The heat was relentless. The stench of unwashed bodies and campfires hung heavy in the air. From his tent, Abd al-Rahman would often stare at the distant walls of Seville, imagining the fear and despair growing within. He knew the cost of war, the lives it devoured, the suffering it wrought. He felt the weight of every decision, the burden of every life lost in his name. Yet his resolve never wavered. He was not a tyrant, he told himself, but a surgeon, cutting out a malignant disease to save the patient. Finally, the cities will broke. Not with a cataclysmic battle, but with the quiet opening of gates. The Banu Hajjaj, seeing the futility of further resistance, surrendered. Abd al-Rahman rode into Seville, not as a conqueror seeking plunder, but as a restorer of order. His soldiers were disciplined, his justice firm but fair. He replaced the defiant governors with loyal administrators, demonstrating that his rule was not about vengeance, but about establishing a new foundation. The fall of Seville sent ripples of fear and respect across the south. City after city, seeing the fate of Besieged and Seville, began to reconsider their allegiance. Abd al-Rahman pressed his advantage, leading his armies through the heart of Andalusia, securing Malaga, Granada, and Jerez. His campaigns were a whirlwind of calculated aggression, swift sieges, and decisive victories. He was everywhere, seemingly indefatigable, his youth belying the strategic genius and unyielding will that drove him. The mountain strongholds, once havens for rebels, now felt the tremors of his approach. The name Abd al-Rahman, once linked to a distant, weakened emirate, now invoked an image of unyielding power. He was the hammer striking blow after blow, shattering the fragments of rebellion piece by agonizing piece. The land, scarred by generations of conflict, began to feel the healing touch of a singular, dominant authority. By the end of the year, a vast swathe of southern Al-Andalus, long lost to Córdoba, had been brought back into the fold. The great rebel, Ibn Hafsun, remained in his mountain lair, a defiant symbol, but his power base had been severely eroded. Abd al-Rahman had secured his southern flank, gaining vital resources and strategic depth. He had shown Al-Andalus that the Umayyad emirate was not dead, but reborn, forged in iron and blood, under the leadership of a young man who understood that power was not inherited, but seized and maintained through an unshakable will. He stood atop a hill, overlooking the newly secured lands, the wind whipping his cloak around him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain he had just traversed. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant calls of night birds. He had won the first battles, but the war for Al-Andalus, for its very identity, had only just begun. The whispers of a unified future now had a voice, a sword, and a name: Abd al-Rahman. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him even in the warm evening air, that many more campaigns of iron and blood lay ahead. The fortress of Bobastro rises from the mountains like a fist of stone thrust against the sky. Its walls cling to sheer cliffs, built into the living rock itself by hands that understood the language of defiance. For 3 decades, these walls have stood unconquered. For 3 decades, they have been the beating heart of rebellion against Córdoba. Abd al-Rahman stands at the edge of his war camp, watching the morning sun paint Bobastro's ramparts in shades of blood and gold. He is 24 years old. The dust of a dozen campaigns already graze his boots. Behind him, 10,000 men prepare for another day of siege warfare, the grinding, patient work of breaking an enemy who refuses to break. The smell of cook fires mingles with horse sweat and the acrid tang of quicklime. Soldiers sharpen swords with rhythmic scraping sounds that echo off the valley walls. Each ring of metal on whetstone is a promise. Each sunrise brings them closer to victory or death. Inside Bobastro's walls, the sons of Umar ibn Hafsun continue their father's war. The old renegade himself died years ago, but his dream of an independent Christian kingdom carved from Andalusian flesh lives on in his children. They have provisions. They have water springs within the fortress. They have faith that these mountains will protect them as they protected their father. Abd Al-Rahman knows better. He walks through the siege lines as dawn breaks fully, his commanders falling into step beside him. The young emir has learned that sieges are won not with dramatic charges, but with mathematics, the cold calculation of supply lines, the geometry of siege towers, the arithmetic of starvation. His grandfather's wars taught him this. His father's failures proved it. The northern approach, he says, pointing to where engineers have spent weeks constructing a ramp of earth and stone. We advance the siege tower today. His voice carries the weight of certainty, but inside, doubt gnaws like a patient rat. What if Bobastro cannot be taken? What if these walls, like so many before them, prove impregnable? The whispers in Córdoba already question his youth, his inexperience. Every day this siege continues is another day his enemies in the capital sharpen their own knives. The siege tower lurches forward on its wooden wheels, pushed by 100 men straining against its weight. Archers crouch behind its protective walls. The structure creaks and groans like a living thing, reluctant to approach its doom. From Bobastro's battlements, defenders watch with the hollow eyes of men who have seen this dance before. Then the arrows come. They fall like deadly rain, whistling down from the heights. One catches a soldier in the throat. He drops without a sound, his blood darkening the dust. Another finds the gap in a shield wall. The wounded man's scream pierces the morning air, raw and animal. Abd Al-Rahman forces himself to watch. A ruler who cannot witness suffering cannot rule justly. He tastes copper in his mouth, fear or determination. He cannot tell which. Perhaps they are the same thing. The tower reaches the wall. Grappling hooks fly. Men begin to climb, their faces set in masks of controlled terror. Steel meets steel, with sounds like breaking bells. A defender tumbles from the ramparts, his arms windmilling uselessly as gravity claims him. The siege tower catches fire pitch and flame transforming wood into an inferno in heartbeats. Men scream as they burn. The assault fails, as it failed yesterday. as it will fail tomorrow. That night, Abd al-Rahman sits alone in his tent, maps spread before him like the entrails of sacrificed animals waiting to reveal the future. Candlelight flickers across parchment, casting dancing shadows on canvas walls. Outside, the wounded moan in the surgeon's tents, their pain a chorus that never quite fades into silence. He thinks of his great-grandfather, Abd al-Rahman I, who fled across deserts and seas to build an emirate from nothing. He thinks of the weight of that legacy, how it can crush as easily as it can inspire. His hand traces the lines of Bobastro's defenses on the map, searching for weakness, for the crack that will bring these walls down. There. The water supply. Always the water. He calls for his engineers in the dead of night. They arrive bleary-eyed, smelling of smoke and exhaustion. He explains his plan in quiet tones, not the dramatic speech of legend, but the practical instructions of a craftsman describing his work. They will divert the mountain springs. They will poison what cannot be diverted. They will turn the fortress's greatest strength into its tomb. The siege of Bobastro will not be won with glory. It will be won with patience, with engineering, with the slow strangulation of hope. Abd al-Rahman lies awake as false dawn grays the eastern sky, listening to the sound of men digging in darkness, the scrape of shovels against stone, writing the future one shovelful at a time. The wind, a constant, abrasive whisper, carried the scent of dust and distant pine across the sun-baked plains of Al-Andalus. For decades, it had also carried the stench of rebellion, a festering wound in the heart of the emirate. From the craggy peaks of the Bobastro Mountains, Umayyad ibn Hafsun, a figure of myth and terror, had defied Córdoba. He was the unyielding thorn in the side of Emir's past, a symbol of division that bled the land dry. Abd al-Rahman, barely into his 20s, understood that the very soul of Al-Andalus hinged on this one, intractable conflict. Bobastro was more than a fortress. It was a defiant fist raised against the central authority, a rallying cry for every malcontent, every ambitious warlord, every tribe seeking independence. To break Bobastro was to shatter the illusion of invincibility that clung to the rebel cause. But to break it, he knew, would demand a patience and a ruthlessness few possessed. His predecessors had hurled armies at the mountain, only to see them dashed against its impregnable defenses, their morale broken, their treasuries emptied. Abd al-Rahman chose a different path. He would not storm the mountain, he would starve it. He would not just fight battles, he would wage a war of attrition, of psychology, of unwavering resolve. From his campaign tent, pitched on a rise overlooking the distant, jagged silhouette of Bobastro, Abd al-Rahman spent countless hours studying maps, listening to reports, his gaze often fixed on the formidable peaks. He saw not just rock and earth, but the network of supply routes, the hidden passes, the loyalties of the surrounding villages. Every stone, every shadow, held a strategic significance. He moved with the quiet intensity of a predator, his eyes, dark and piercing, missing nothing. The heat of the Andalusian summer beat down relentlessly, shimmering off the desert floor, but the emir's resolve remained unyielding, a cold core in the sweltering world. Year after grueling year, the campaigns continued. His armies, led by loyal generals, and often by Abd al-Rahman himself, moved like a relentless tide. They captured outlying strongholds, blockaded roads, cut off vital supply lines, and slowly, inexorably, tightened the noose around Bobastro. The clanging of swords and the roar of battle became a familiar, if unwelcome, symphony across the mountain valleys. But more insidious was the silence, the growing silence in the besieged villages, the empty markets, the desperate whispers of hunger that began to filter down from the mountain's stronghold. Abd al-Rahman was present for much of it. He rode alongside his men, sharing their hardships, understanding their weariness. He felt the grit of sand on his teeth, the ache in his muscles, the gnawing anxiety of command. He saw the faces of his soldiers, hardened by constant vigilance, longing for home. He knew the cost of every life, every lost horse, every shattered shield. But he also knew the greater cost of failure. He carried the weight of Al-Andalus on his shoulders, a young man burdened by the legacy of division and the desperate hope for unity. His internal struggle was a silent one. Doubt was a luxury he could not afford. There were moments, late at night, under the vast, star-dusted sky, when the sheer magnitude of the task would press down on him. The years of conflict had taken their toll on the land, on the people, and on him. But he pushed through, fueled by an unwavering vision, a unified, prosperous Al-Andalus, free from the shadow of rebels. Then word came. Not a thunderous victory, not a breached wall, but a quiet, momentous ripple. Umar ibn Hafsun was dead. The old rebel, the mountain spirit, had finally succumbed, not to a Córdoba blade, but to the slow, relentless erosion of time and illness. A hush fell over the camp. It wasn't a cheer that erupted, but a collective exhale. The figure who had haunted the dreams of emirs for decades was gone. His sons, Suleiman and Hafs, tried to maintain the rebellion, but the heart had gone out of it. The mountain had lost its soul. The symbolic leader, the unyielding father of the rebellion, was no more. The campaigns continued, of course, for the fortress itself remained. But the nature of the war had changed, fundamentally. The relentless pressure Abd al-Rahman had applied, year after year, had not just weakened the enemy's defenses, it had broken their spirit, culminating in the death of their iconic leader. The mountain, once an insurmountable obstacle, now felt hollow. Its invincibility had been a myth, sustained by one man's will. As news of Ibn Hafsun's demise spread across Al-Andalus, a profound shift occurred. The endless war, once a symbol of Córdoba's weakness, now became a testament to Abd al-Rahman's unyielding strength. His patience had been rewarded. His strategy, slow and arduous, had proven devastatingly effective. He stood on the rise, looking at Bobastro, no longer a symbol of defiant rebellion, but a fortress whose doom was sealed. The sun, finally breaking through the morning haze, cast a golden glow over the peaks. It was a new dawn, and from the shadows of a broken mountain, the eagle of Al-Andalus was truly beginning to soar. He had not just fought a war, he had laid the foundation for an empire forged in the crucible of relentless will. The unification of Al-Andalus, once a distant dream, was now a tangible, unfolding reality.